In one corner, Visa and Mastercard, the companies that spent last year enforcing their rules on Steam and itch.io, basically deciding what gets to count as legitimate art. And a year where even if they wanted to, Steam couldn't really do that much. So, for a year, these payment processors have been untouchable, even after the public pushback. But in the other corner, we have a new challenger, and that challenger is the US government, the heaviest heavyweight that some are now hoping can pressure these companies. But before this big bout gets underway, well, as it turns out, there's probably a real fix. But it's probably not going to come from either corner of this argument. And that's what makes it an interesting story. Let me get you up to speed. So last year, Valve and itch.io, who are the biggest commercial and artistic game distribution sites, basically gave up control of their platforms. And honestly, they kind of had to. The companies controlling the purse strings told them to, right? That's Mastercard, Visa, and the other payment processors downstream. They're the people who move the money around the place, and you cannot run a store without people to move money around the place. And they mostly went after adult games. The payment processors asked for those games to be removed from sale. Valve's explanation? Well, pressure from Mastercard affiliates over illegal or brand-damaging transactions. And here's the thing. These games were not illegal in countries like America. So this is not about a payment processor saying, that's an illegal thing, we will not facilitate it. That seems reasonable. This is different, and to many, including me, it is overreach. Sure, many don't want to play those games, but many do, and they are legal to sell in these countries. Players push back against this with phone and email campaigns trying to change this policy and to stop a third party deciding what could be sold and what art could even be made. Because yes, to be sustainable, art does actually have to make money. That's the way this works. Money is an exchange of value, and we can't all be, say, Renaissance Italians who happen to find a nice little patron that we can fluff up in return for enough money to fund our art. It's not like that. And even though this story hasn't generated many fresh headlines, Steam's crackdown on adult content is actually still going on. One developer we spoke to tried to release 2 games in the last year, and both were caught by the new standards. The first was interpreted by Steam's moderators as having illegal content, which the devs completely deny. They also had no chance of appeal. As for the second one, well, things seemed to be going well, but then Steam asked them to showcase everything adult that would ever be added to the game. 6 weeks of silence later, Steam blocked it for depicting, quote, real people. That was in spite of them using industry-standard 3D animation. So that's years of work wasted, staff layoffs, contractors suspended, and a studio kept in limbo and locked out of the biggest game store that there is, and one that, of course, was only happy to flick on adult games and completely support them mere years ago. But now, some people think that help may be coming from a relatively unlikely place: the US government. First though, something that ties back to our previous coverage, because in this video we learned how game spending is falling, but subscriptions on games are actually rising. Too often we don't use those subs, and that's why Rocket Money is today's sponsor, because they make it easy for you to just get a handle on your subscriptions and save money. And you can get started for free today at rocketmoney.com/Bellular. Now, Rocket Money will securely and safely identify recurring charges for you. You can then just cancel them with just a few taps. They've put the work in to make the UI and everything really smooth and easy. So if this is a chore you've been putting off, just, get Rocket Money and do it. Now's the time. Now, they'll also help you with bill negotiation, where you just upload your bill and they'll be able to help you out. I mean, a personal example for me, it's my go-to, is whenever my internet went to its off-contract price, I got on the phone. They initially denied me, but I was able to negotiate a speed upgrade and a halving of my monthly bill. So you can get that kind of thing too. And the thing is, I could have got that months earlier, but life got in the way. And that's the huge value of Rocket Money. They make all this stuff really easy. Now, they've cancelled over $880 million worth of subscriptions. They've helped their customers save up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. They've got other great tools beyond what I've mentioned, so if you want to spend less and save more, sounds pretty good to me, join the over 10 million Rocket Money members today at rocketmoney.com/Bellular, or just click the link below. You can get started for free and unlock more features with premium. rocketmoney.com/Bellular. As flagged by adult industry site XBiz, the chairman of the FTC has actually written to the CEOs of Mastercard, Stripe, Visa, and PayPal. The subject? Debanking. And that's actually the threat made to Valve and itch, that their payment processing would be pulled, and you can't really run the world's largest game store if you're getting debanked all over the place. Here's what the press release says. Full participation in commerce and public life necessarily requires that law-abiding individuals can access and freely participate in our financial system. Of course, for the game makers pushed off Steam and itch, here's what actually matters here. The letter to Mastercard says that companies can't allow, quote, unlawful debanking by members that process transactions on its network, which basically is what happens with Valve. So to some, this basically looks like the US banking regulator riding to the rescue of devs who've been pushed off these game platforms. But actually, this is something that's been building up for quite a while. And that takes me to August 2025, right in the middle of these game delistings, when the White House issued an executive order. It was called Guaranteeing Fair Banking for All Americans, and it directed the FTC to take action on the issue of debanking. And that's what we're seeing now. Basically, reminders to the heads of these organizations that they are under review and they cannot keep on getting away with what they've done. So by now you might be feeling positive about this story, that payment processors are somehow going to be forced to, well, process transactions for legal sales of goods. But here's the wrinkle in that, here's the problem. What the FTC and the White House care about has absolutely nothing to do with video games, at least not with this legislation. That's why the story is actually more interesting and why this video is not yet over. The executive order lists a very specific example of what it considers debanking, and that is Operation Choke Point from the Department of Justice. Originally, in 2013, it was about getting banks to think more cautiously about high-risk businesses. So that's pawn shops, gun dealers, payday loans, online gambling, adult content providers, that kind of thing, which should sound familiar to our story. Now, that's because all of them are at a higher risk of chargebacks or money laundering. Now, in 2017, politicians called a new round of checks on unregulated crypto a second wave. So you got all that risk appetite stuff, but the executive order also brings up banks tracking transactions in and around January 6th. I'll leave you to guess what year, but basically some of those involved were debanked, and the Mastercard letter from the FTC actually goes further. It cites the closure of the president's JP Morgan accounts. So, if you put your detective's hat on, can you see where this story's going, guys? Basically, gaming is just collateral in all of this. The real target is US political infrastructure and its financial interests, and how banking processes hamper them. That's what it's about. And it's because banks have this concept that is called risk appetite. They'll only take on so many high-risk accounts. That can mean cash-heavy businesses, politicians, their families, and really anyone who could bring in reputational damage. That's because those accounts cost way more to monitor, they carry more risk. So to manage all that, a bank will have its risk appetite, and anything beyond that threshold will basically get told to go and take their business elsewhere, whether it is legitimate or not. Basically, it's them refusing custom. And this is exactly what drove Mastercard and the others to act in the first place. Remember the phrase, brand damaging transactions? It is all about that. So, if you're wondering why a payment processor gets to decide what games you can buy, well, this is the actual machinery behind it. It is risk appetite. It's not really a content review. It's not a legal judgment as to whether that product should be sold, whether it's legal to be sold. No, it is a financial calculation about brand exposure and criminal liability. Now, some hope that if the full weight of the US government comes down on this, that adult game makers may just happen to benefit from it going on. That perhaps as a part of these sweeping reforms, they may finally just get left to run their businesses in peace. But the thing is, the target of all this is not that wide. Let me explain. Reuters confirmed last August that across 13 years of Consumer Financial Protection Bureau data, only 35 out of 8,361 people who complained about debanking cited political or religious reasons. That's the problem for the game side of things, because per those numbers, what the government is targeting here is basically those 35 things out of over 8,000. And that basically means the banks really don't have to do that much to fix the administration's particular complaints. And that likely doesn't mean great news for those who have been banned from Steam and from itch. And that is especially because they're already gearing up to be challenged under entirely different legal terms. When we look at the actions of Mastercard and the other payment processors, we see that what they're implementing is their own policies. They are not implementing laws. They are targeting legal content, but the people making it can't really fight back in the same way that the White House can, for obvious reasons. But what can change is the law, and Steam has already shown us exactly how it responds whenever legal authority gets involved. Now for that, we go back to March 2025. That's when we got the first rumblings of the payment processor problem, and it started with no mercy. It was an adult game in Steam. It was flagged by an activist group called Collective Shout for its content. Now, that content eventually got in trouble with the UK government, where it was actually illegal to be sold under 2023 legislation. Now, Valve eventually responded to this by geo-locking the game, but that was weeks after it was first flagged. Now, what that did is it set the tone for the platforms caving to payment processor pressure later on in the year. And it actually went further. In November of 2025, Video Games Industry Memo covered the case of Flick Solitaire, where Russia's media regulator went after the developer Flick Games because they breached a 2006 law by promoting non-traditional sexualities. Ooh! They're going to come out of the screen! They're going to get you and make you non-traditional. Very scary stuff. And the offending part of the game? Well, it was optional LGBTQ-themed art cards. Clearly a present and active threat that was going to destroy the fabric of Russia. Now, Valve immediately geo-locked the game in response to this, and they blamed the developer for not actively restricting their game to comply with local laws. Now, whenever something like that happens, that's not Valve saying, oh yeah, we agree with Russia. It is Valve basically saying, well, you can't sell a game on our store in a region where that game would be in breach of the law in that region. I probably could have phrased that better, but I hope you get the point. Now, in both cases, they didn't even need a payment processor to get involved. Steam will comply with the law, just like they will for, say, age verification. And that might make the next point a bit alarming for some of you. The foreword of Project 2025, which is a legislative wish list published by the Heritage Foundation, it calls for adult content to be outlawed outright. That means producers imprisoned, distributors prosecuted, and technology firms that host this stuff being shut down. And Game Developers Analysis pointed out that the definition is broad enough to catch games that maybe, say, just have some of the gays in them. A queer character. As an example, The Sims. If two of your Sims bang, your Sims could be in breach of the law. Quite something. Now, if that becomes law, platforms like Steam and itch would not have a choice. That's because they've already shown us that they will comply. Now, what I want you to do here is not think about this in partisan political terms. It's not about sides winning. In my view, this sort of thing is about what role government should take. Personally, I think that the likes of this would be a huge overreach, which I absolutely do not support. You know, it reminds me of, say, the days when David Cameron got very perturbed about face-sitting and some UK law was changed. But beyond that, the through line across all of this, the payment processor policy, the government legislation, the platform compliance, it basically is that a handful of American financial companies hold veto power over what can be sold worldwide. No single policy change fixes that. And the reason why is it's the structure. It is literally how all of this shit runs, because we do our exchanges of value, not via bartering. I don't turn in some grain to Gabe and then have Gabe give me a video game. No, I have this thing called currency, and it's the companies that facilitate the maneuver of that currency that effectively dictate what can or cannot be done. But there may be some good news. There may be changes to that structure. I first came across this in one of my favorite channels, TechAlter. Now, he recently pointed out that countries are trying to reduce their reliance on American transaction services like Visa and Mastercard. This is by way of national digital wallets, phone-based apps, peer-to-peer payment platforms, basically all systems that would give storefronts options beyond the two companies that control the major pipelines. So if a platform doesn't need Mastercard to process payments, then Mastercard doesn't get to decide what that platform can sell. And that is the leverage that is currently missing. Because as much as Steam is big, as much as Valve are powerful, they're really powerless in the face of stuff that is this big. I mean, think about the sheer insane scale of the likes of Visa and Mastercard. And even more than that, just look at the scope of their profits. I imagine that with a nice profit margin like that, one would certainly be able to afford just a little pinch of political lobbying. And that's one of the ways where the capitalist system can actually break down. Whenever there is influence in government, whenever these companies essentially do act as utilities in how big they are and how they basically facilitate the world working, and then, well, get so much power and so much profit that they can start tipping the scales in their favor. I think it would be better for all of us if there was more diversity in the payment space. And the news on that front is early, but it is good. None of the alternatives are fully ready yet, but they are happening. They are being built. And every time a payment processor effectively pulls a game from a storefront, the case for building those alternatives only gets better. And I think the direction of travel is those alternatives. So I think we can all agree that Mastercard shouldn't be the people dictating what is or is not a valid piece of art, but it's not the only example of global infrastructure getting in the way of, well, the video games. And that's why we need to talk about the RAM crisis. There have been some maybe positive headlines. I don't think they're all that they're really made out to be. And to learn why, watch this.